Hey everyone, my name is Charlie, and today I have my February wrap-up. Of course, this is going to follow the same template as last month's wrap-up, in which I had no computer in which to be able to edit this video, and so it was uploaded straight from my iPhone. You'd think that in a month I might have managed to find a laptop, but I have had advice from my friend Lindsay, whose opinion I value. I've had an opinion of Dave from over at Wild Reads. Steve Donahue chipped in last night. I've had advice from people at the writers group, from reviews I've watched online, and I still have no idea what sort of computer to get. So we could still be in this position next month. My computer is still currently with Currys because they're going to try and see if they can fix it, even though I don't believe they can. Oh, there is a black cat in the car park today. Such fun. Anyway, we're not doing much reading at the moment, for various reasons. The main being that I just don't know that I can be very much bothered with reading at the moment as this laptop search continues, and as I continue to slowly dwindle my presence on YouTube and BookTube after Morning Mr. Magpie, after so many people helped me find new subscribers. Hello, new subscribers. I decided that I'd just disappear for a bit, because of said laptop malfunctioning and all that fun stuff. So here we are, and reading just isn't at the forefront of my mind at the moment. I have been listening to The Archers, and I have been maybe doing a bit of writing, but nothing major. Anyway, let's start with this wrap-up. The first book that I read in February was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and I do not like this book. I do not want to call into question calling this poetry. However, I do think that it was very much written for those people who are on Instagram, who are after inspirational quotes or after something a bit hard-hitting. And it was taking the little bit of grit you would find in a poem and just calling it that, and not going to any length or any measure to create any sort of imagery behind it. I don't want to get into the debate of whether it's poetry or not. It could easily be a different kind of poetry, but it is definitely not poetry for me. I thought that the writer, went for shock value and quotable lines more than actually trying to flesh out poems and create something that will linger. I know that quite a few people enjoy this book, and more power to them, but I couldn't help but just think that it was not good. And I still kept the book to try and see whether my sister will read it and, say whether it's exactly what I'm thinking that it is. People who are looking for quotable lines and stuff, because I thought it was poor, I thought it was drivel, I thought there was no substance, no artistic merit within there, and personally, to read it, I read it in half an hour. It's a 200-page book, and I read it in half an hour because it was very much like what you'd expect from a young teenage writer first starting out in poetry and thinking this is what people want, and she hasn't actually managed to cultivate a voice for herself yet. And because so many people have liked this poet's work before, she's ended up with a book before maybe she'd actually found her voice. And if this is her voice, then I feel very sorry for her. Next, I read Monstrous, and Is This by Marjorie Liu and some other people. It's a graphic novel. It got bought into the shop and I decided to borrow it because I know that it had been on YouTube a fair bit years ago, and yeah, thought this book was terrible. It took, like graphic novels usually I can get through and they're a bit compulsive for me, but this one I was reading and waiting for it to end. And I know usually I DNF books, but it didn't happen here. And I thought there might have been, like I quite enjoyed the art maybe, but the story, the whole thing behind, I found it poor. I did not care for it. Next, I read The Chalkman by C.J. Tudor, and I have a review for that, but I found there were more problems in that book than there were merits, and because of that I told people that really, if you're going to read this book, then for me it's just like a one and done sort of book, but I do think as a debut it should be read, and I would look to reading some of the author's works in future when she isn't so heavily focused on cliche. Maybe that's something within the thriller genre that I haven't met with yet, but to me I didn't care for it. Next, I read Closed Casket by Sophie Hannah. This is a Hercule Poirot book in which a woman, she's an ageing writer, invites Poirot and Inspector Catchpool to her house, and then somebody in the house is murdered and they need to solve it. I have a review for this that I haven't uploaded yet because I haven't watched it back and I don't know whether I made all the points, but personally I read this book to see whether Sophie Hannah had improved from the Monogram murders, and whilst I think she has improved, I don't think she captures Hercule Poirot's voice well. I think that these books are too long and I think they get too convoluted because the murderer is always usually quite easy to figure out. But yeah, maybe I'll upload that review and you can hear my full thoughts. Next, I read Black Dog by Stephen Booth, and this is the first book in his rather long Cooper and Fry series. This book came out, well, my edition came out in the year 2000, and it is set in the Peak District. A girl has gone missing and the detectives are searching for her, and then a body turns up. This I found to be, I think it might have been the first maybe police procedural book that I've read. It was very heavy on the police procedure here, but it did also do something that if I ever went into writing this sort of genre, I would quite like it, because I know that this book is a series and it sets up the town and all these various places in the Peak District extremely well, which I think would work for future books, and I know there are a lot of books in this series. Stephen Booth came to the writers group a few years ago, and this was when I bought this book, and it took me a few days to read. It was a bit of a slog because I think it was written for the time, and I know it's only 17 years ago, 18 really, but I think there was a different way of perhaps writing crime then that involved being more focused on the police procedure and it's very literary, and there is a lot of focus on description and setting up possible future relationships. And I may be incredibly wrong because obviously I haven't read any of these future books, but I intend to. And it would be good if I could actually read some of these books, because I've discovered that crime series I start, I never seem to get past the first book. But Black Dog was one of those books where it gave you a lot of suspects and it gave you a lot of red herrings and things. And personally, I couldn't figure out who the killer was going to be. And then it did the thing that I'm not really that fond of, where the crime was solved, but it almost felt like a cheat to the reader because this character hadn't really even been talked about much. And I know that when you put into place everything that the scenes this character was in, it might have worked and jigsawed well together to create this overall whole of the book, and I enjoyed the writing and everything, but that one bit did leave me feeling a bit, oh well, this person was never on the cards, so Yeah. I hope I've not spoiled that, because I was trying not to spoil it and then I nearly slipped up, so let's hope that nobody was paying attention. Either way, Cooper and Fry series, I recommend it. I remember Stephen Booth saying that people didn't like how Fry treated Cooper, and they go up and mention it to him at events, and you know what, I kind of agree. I understand why she is the way she is, but Lord, can she be a bit abrupt and acerbic. And yeah, I do know a few people like that. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. I know some of the stuff about the future book simply because of the way the presentation Stephen Booth did. He couldn't not talk about his current book because he was 17 books in then? I don't know. Anyway, definitely looking forward to the future books in this series. Then I read Search by D.K. Bowman. This is an independently published book, and as this month is a indie readathon, I believe, then this might be one of those books to pick up. It is the first in a crime series starring Callum Newman and his assistant, whose name I am very sorry to say that I have forgotten, because I just don't have the book with me. But I read this in one day, read it last Sunday, and I have had this book for a few years. I've had this book since Dave first published it way back when, because he comes to the writers group that I'm secretary of, because Anyway, this is what I wish the Cormoran Strike books were, because I don't think the Cormoran Strike books were written particularly well. And whilst there are some editorial choices I would have made differently in Search, I was really impressed with it, especially for an indie author and a first time, it's his debut. I thought that this book was brilliant. I liked the way that Bowman set up the story. I liked the inclusion of different narratives about the family of these characters and their lives outside of the crime. Anyway, I should probably say what the book's about. Basically, Callum Newman is called to investigate the children of this woman because she has a long-term illness that she needs to tell her children about because it's degenerative and it could be passed down to them. Hereditary, that was the word I was looking for. And basically, Callum Newman sets out, and on the way, there are murders, there are intrigue, there is witchcraft. Now, this witchcraft, I will just say now, it is not the witchcraft that we're thinking of with the broomsticks and the pointy hats. This is witchcraft. It's very much about the spirituality, and it's more of a religion and a group of people meeting for pagan rituals than it is for spells and things. And I thought that it was a nice inclusion, especially when the book is set. The book is set in Scotland, and it really lends itself well to that sort of story. And also, I know we've had Scottish detectives before, but I like the story here, and it did remind me of Inspector Rebus, which then made me want to find the Inspector Rebus books and start reading them again, because I only read 2 of them, and I was enjoying them way back when. I really need to continue reading crime series. Why do I give up on them? It's because there's about 50 million books in them. Anyway, Search doesn't necessarily have a mystery behind it in the conventional sense, but it is very much a thriller and a book that I would recommend to folk to go out to find somewhere. I don't know if it's on Amazon, but search it out, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. And yeah. And then I read one last book this month, which was Death of a Cad by MC Beaton, and I didn't like this book. I don't know why I bother reading MC Beaton anymore. I know that I can get through these books incredibly quickly. I know that when there's a murderer, it's never going to be a difficult murder to solve, but for some reason I keep being brought back to them. I've nearly read all of the Agatha Raisin books. I did them in my first year of uni, And whilst the subsequent books I've not necessarily made an effort to get around, I own them as well. And this was a Hamish Macbeth book. Hamish Macbeth starred Robert Carlyle way back in the 90s, was a TV show which was basically like the Scottish Heartbeat, and I used to watch that show with my grandmother, and I thoroughly enjoyed the show. The books are completely different. MC Beaton has famously said that she didn't necessarily care for the TV show because Robert Carlyle didn't look like how she had described Hamish. I can only think that the reason that she doesn't actually like the show is because it takes her story and it takes her characters and it gives them some sort of depth and plot, because every single character in this book is a caricature. It is incredibly trite and cliched and tropey rubbish. It is drivel, and yet for some reason I keep trying to read them. I have read 2 of these books now, neither of which I have enjoyed. I know that in later books they get worse. I know that MC Beaton as a writer is able to churn out these books incredibly quickly, but to me that's a problem, and I just wish that they had been better edited. And I think that the reason that she's able to get away with stuff is because she has a way with words in which, even though it's very easy to read, it's very accessible, and it's basically for your not your Mills and Boon, your People's Friend type of reader, which isn't a knock at the People's Friend. We all know that I was trying to write for the People's Friend a few years ago. Well, I tried to write one thing for them, but I tried to. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe I am no longer accepting of cozy crime that isn't written well, because there is so much cozy crime written nowadays. It's one of the most popular genres to write in. I rather enjoy the genre myself, but there are some in there that are still written well and still have merit. And I keep talking about merit. Everything, it does have some artistic merit, clearly, because people are enjoying these books, and MC Beaton was the most borrowed of authors from libraries for a few years in a row. But personally, I don't know that I will be reading any more of her books, and I say this now, and I know that I'm definitely going to, but for now, for the next few months, for the duration, we ain't going to be touching her books. Anyway, I've rambled on for much longer than I intended to, and I don't know that I necessarily reviewed these books as well as I reviewed last month's books in 6 minutes, but this is what happens when you don't sleep anymore. And this is what happens when you have nowhere to properly record, and this is what happens when you aren't reading the books on your shelves. I need to read some books. I need to get it done. Anyway, have you read any of these books? If so, please feel free to discuss them in the comments. Maybe we agree, maybe we disagree. It's all good. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.